Bench Opinions. Three idiots with amateur analysis.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Bench Opinions, this is the leftovers segment. If you haven't listened to the two previous episodes, football and rugby, I would encourage you to go and check it out. We take a bit of a deep dive since Maxi is on holiday. We can have grown-up conversations.
You don't have the local joker messing up the conversation.
Deep, political, insightful, intellectual conversations about the world of football and rugby. We miss him dearly, yet we've decided to make the best of it. So check out those episodes, like and subscribe. And today we're discussing the rest of the sport in the world, which tends to be cricket when it's on, golf, and Formula One.
Yeah, and sometimes tennis.
Which you could argue is the my daddy's got a boat section.
Yeah.
Because
rich man sport.
Very rich man sport, exactly. So a lot happening this week, as always. Tends to come thick and fast, particularly on the golf circuit. So we can maybe start with golf.
What tournament was on this weekend? Because obviously last weekend we had the big Masters.
Yeah, that's insane.
Sorry, did you see there was a stat that it was the most viewed sporting event of all time? No, surely not.
No, I think
all time.
the most of golf ever.
Of golf, okay.
And also very funny because all the people on X having arguments, the Rory versus the Bryson crowd having arguments about why that is. The Bryson people saying, yeah, it's Bryson's effect because he was in the hunt on Sunday. But I was like, what a load of bullshit.
I think it was because it was just highly, highly competitive
golf.
Yeah,
and Rory was making history. So anyway, let's not get into that argument. I think it's redundant.
Yeah.
But yes, so off the back of big viewership numbers, we went into a week where there were two parallel PGA Tour events happening at the same time.
And those were?
The RBC Heritage, which is a very famous, very sought after golf tournament that's happened for very many years. It's also been hosted at Harbour Town Golf Links for a very long time. That's in South Carolina, and it is one of the most amazing golf courses on earth, Harbour Town Links.
Okay.
Quite unique in that it's got a sort of a, what do you call those things that keep the ships at bay? A lighthouse. It's a good thing we don't do podcasts on architecture.
Keep them from crashing into the rocks.
Yeah, a lighthouse that's red and white, so a very classic lighthouse as they come into the 18th. And also there you also win. It's always hosted close to the Masters. You also win a jacket. It's a red tartan jacket.
Oh, why isn't it red and white striped?
I don't know. It's sad.
Missed opportunity.
Exactly. But yeah, so Scheffler's won it last year, so he was there this week as well. And before we get into who won it and what happened there, and then parallel, the Corrales Championship was happening.
Sounds Spanish.
It was in the Dominican Republic. That's why it sounds Spanish. A very interesting day. I'll talk you through that quickly. South African winning. Garrick Higo, lefty, getting his second win on the PGA Tour, the first in quite a long time, playing in crazy choppy conditions, very, very windy. Joel Darman leading.
Okay.
He shot 62-60 first 2 days.
Man of the fans.
And had a complete utter collapse on the back nine. He made 3 bogeys in a row to lose by 1.
That sounds pretty on par for him.
Yeah, so he was pretty bummed, but great win for Garrick Higo. Interesting thing we'll touch on it afterwards because it kind of plays hand in hand what I want to talk about. And then at the RBC Heritage, Justin Thomas winning for the first time since 2022.
It's been a while.
Been a long time for him, and he seemed to get very close quite often. And he's one of those golfers I find that really is desperate to win. And it's a weird comment to make, but it's just he plays with such desperation and he's hard on his sleeve that I think he is his worst enemy at times. But getting it over the line in a playoff against someone who's never won before, Novak, and winning one of the PGA Tour's 8 signature events.
Okay.
And this is the reason, and this is what I want to talk about. This is the reason that there was a parallel event this week, because in the weeks where the signature events played on the PGA Tour, they are no-cut events. The fields are much smaller, so 70 to 80 players as opposed to 140 that they usually have. So to get in is much tougher. Way bigger purses, which means way more world ranking points and way more FedEx Cup points. And a lot of people saying that this is a response to the Live Tour situation. The the PGA Tour trying to have more events that really attract big fields and big profiles. I mean, big in terms of big, I mean high profile players.
Yeah.
Which you could argue is strange to then do the week after the Masters because the field wasn't that stacked.
I was going to ask if Justin Thomas is winning, where's everybody else?
Yeah, interesting because you would think after the Masters on Easter, putting a signature event on that weekend is a little bit strange if you're trying to attract the best players, and you can see it in the lineup. Scotty Scheffler was one of the only other big names. Tommy Fleetwood was there as well, but I wouldn't consider him a top tier player anymore. Really, he's a great golfer, but he's not someone that draws massive crowds. And that the field really wasn't stacked in that sense. So very strange, and the signature events have come in for a lot of criticism because people feel like it's shutting out potential players that want to try and climb the rankings. And you kind of, as the rich get richer, so to speak, both literally and figuratively, they say that it's creating a bit of a two-class system in the PGA Tour. And so very interesting. And if you do look at the field at the Corrales, and this is what a lot of people are criticizing about the PGA Tour as a whole, is that there are just some events where there's just a no-name bunch of very good golfers, but no one that has any pulling power at all.
I was going to ask, was there anybody of noteworthy at the Corrales event?
I would say Joel Dahmen was the standout, only because of his fame from off the back of Full Swing.
He's even worse than Tommy Fleetwood.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think there's like an indirect pull there, but Garrick Higo hadn't won in over 2 years, I think. He managed to keep his tour card, but he hasn't really won in a while. He got injured as well, so he's on a medical exemption, and now he's got his exemption for the tour for 2 years again after winning. But yeah, he had an interview after the game actually, and spoke to Dan Rappaport, which a lot of people know from Full Swing as well. And he currently has no sponsors.
Nothing.
No
club sponsors.
No. So he's a PGA Tour winner as of this week and has no sponsors.
I mean, he must have all the leverage in the world now.
Yeah, one would think, and I'm sure he'll go out and he will negotiate, I'm sure, apparel and club contracts. But yeah, and I think that's a perfect sign for maybe what the negative effect that the signature events are having on the tour.
How can you both have two events at the same time? Like, what's the benefit of that? Because that's just going to dilute the field, right?
So this makes me think that the PGA Tour existed in its entirety for a bunch of years. The Live Tour came along and someone was like, we have to respond. And the afterthought element was, come hell or high water, we have to have what is called these signature events. And because of that, the schedule was messed up in such a way that there are tournaments like Corrales where there are sponsors and people that want to host these tournaments and want to create PGA Tour competitions, particularly in places like, there was another tournament in Puerto Rico, for example, that also was hosted alongside another more important PGA Tour event a while ago. So all like these these countries that do really want to host PGA Tour events, or these locations that do, or destinations. I think the afterthought of we have to have these signature events and elevate these events has created a schedule where this happens. Yeah.
So they're just shooting themselves in the foot at this point now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I actually, funny enough, I was watching the end of the RBC because it was quite close. I mean, it ended up being one in a playoff, so it was pretty exciting. But I ended up actually switching to Corrales because of Joel Dahmen, amongst other things. But also, obviously, Garrick Higo being South African and him going on to win. So I really wanted to see that. But that brings me to another thing, and this is something we've touched on before, is maybe how we define big names on tour needs to be looked at.
In what regard?
Joel Dahmen definitely pulls people wherever he goes because of his personality and because of what he's done on Full Swing, etc.
Yeah. Less through his success, more through his...
I think equity in terms of what a tour player can bring needs to be reassessed. And I get that it's really difficult because at the end of the day, if you're hosting big tournaments where there's the most money, then surely only naturally the best players in the world have to have access to it. But I don't know if there's a smarter way to do it. And I think the fact that it feels like an afterthought, and like Will.i.am always says, what does he say? If it sounds like a duck and looks like a duck, it probably is a duck. You said that one. Anyway.
I've never heard him say that.
He said it once in the Voice audition. No one really understood what he meant, but in this case, it's a good analogy. Yeah.
Finally, it's got a purpose.
Yeah, and if it has, if it does feel like an afterthought, then it probably is one.
Yeah. But now getting back to your equity thing, how would what's your suggestion? You're saying that if somebody's got a certain following, he makes the cut?
Yeah, I think there must be metrics to measure this kind of thing by for example, Joel Dahman, how many people follow him around a golf course at every tournament?
Right.
What is viewership like when he's in the hunt or during his round on Thursday and Friday in any of these tournaments? And maybe creating, outside of the ranking systems, another sort of way to structure tournaments in such a way that if you're going to host two tournaments at the same time, that it makes sense somehow. But I don't think two PGA tournaments running concurrently makes any sense at all in any way you try and sell it.
If you started introducing different metrics, say like followership or something like that, don't you think you're going to be diluting the level of golf because you'll be getting people in that followership? They maybe just are outrageous. I mean, you could put what's his name? I got Wispy on my mind. What's that guy's name?
John Daly.
Well, you got a John Daly who's just outrageous, and people follow him because of what's the next most fucked up thing he's gonna do.
Yeah,
but like he can't play golf anymore.
Yeah, I just think you're not doing anyone any. I think if Joel Dahman doesn't play at the Corrales, you have a massive, even bigger problem.
Right.
In terms of if Joel Dahman doesn't play well at Corrales, that event basically
dies.
Is non-existent in like the world golfing sphere. And again, I come back to, I don't think two tournaments running concurrently on the same week is ever going to make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense.
I don't think it makes sense at all. And I think you have to, because of that, I also don't understand, why don't you just, if it's about resources and money, why don't you just pool the two purses? I think Gary Kago ended up winning $700,000 as the winner, which is a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
But it's not, it pales in comparison, I think Justin Thomas won over $2 million. So why don't you just pool the prize funds, and have a qualifier on the Monday, which they do anyway at PGA Tour events. So at normal PGA Tour events, they always have a Monday qualifier to get into the Monday and get into the week, the tournament. And for the signature events, they don't. So they don't have cuts, and you don't have a Monday qualifier. So unless you're invited or you ranked and you get in. And then you throw in the whole factor of sponsor invites, etc., which has always also been very dubious in the golfing world.
Surely there must have been some sort of contract that was overlapping and they couldn't get rid of it, so they had to sort of.
Like I said, I think it's really just it was a knee-jerk decision. It's been a knee-jerk decision by the PGA Tour to try and respond to the Live Tour situation, and I just don't think. I think it's an experiment that's failed.
The PGA is always they always come across a bit German, which I think is a good analogy. They overthink things, they overcomplicate things, and then they're just very slow to react.
I think it's a very typical example of, and then we're seeing this in Germany now, actually. We don't want to get social political, but we're seeing this in Germany. It's a very clear sign of someone that's been very dominant without any competition and had a monopoly for a very, very long time, that has never had to think on its feet, now being challenged for the first time. So let's see how it develops. I think eventually what happens is everything's going to come together anyway. I think everything's going to be merged somehow between all the tours, and then your live events will end up being your signature events and kind of replace them, and then they'll have the regular PGA Tour season. That's my prediction. Take it or leave it.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
But yeah, that's the world of golf.
Nice. Let's move over to a sport that's a little bit
faster
and more expensive.
True.
So on the weekend, you okay?
Every time it's the Formula One thing that just gets me.
Just quietly dying in the corner over there. On the weekend we had the race in Saudi Arabia, and we had Piastri starting off on pole position. Sorry, Max Verstappen starting off on pole position, Piastri starting in second. And the first corner got a little bit hairy. Piastri had the inside line, had a much better start and was way ahead of Max Verstappen. And Max Verstappen essentially didn't brake, so that he was technically in front of Piastri at the corner, but was carrying so much speed he could never make the corner, which meant he just drove right over the corner. It was like a left-right. So he just drove right over the corner and maintained first position. The stewards reviewed it, deemed it an unfair advantage, and because he didn't hand back the position, he got a 5-second penalty. At the end of the race, he lost by 2.5 seconds. So he wasn't happy about that. He thought it was very controversial, but he didn't want to talk about it in any of the press interviews. They have their press conference afterwards, and he was asked multiple times. They're like, "What do you think about this penalty that you received? How did it influence your race? Do you think you could have won?" Dr. Helmut Marko, he was asked, and he was like, "Yeah, Max Verstappen definitely would have won if they hadn't received this 5-second penalty." But Max Verstappen just said, "I'm not talking about it. I'm not talking about anything. Essentially, you can ask me whatever you like. I'm not going to give you a response." And then they said, "Well, why? Why are you not responding?" And his words were, "I can't say anything because of the society that we live in. It's going to get twisted. And I also can't say anything because I'll be penalized for it." One of the reporters then asked, "In what way will you get penalized for it? Is there like a code of conduct that you're going against?" And he just said, "There's a contract that we've had to sign, and there's a whole bunch of things that are listed." He didn't list any of them. He just said there's like 5, 6, 7 different things that are listed that we're not allowed to talk about. So I'm not saying anything just to save myself the headache later. And so I don't want to talk about Formula One too much. Piastri ended up winning the race, and but I wanted to talk about there are sports, rugby being one of them, where you're not allowed to criticize the federation or the organizers or the event, or even stewards, referees, umpires. Is that, in rugby, it's down to respect. Is that beneficial for the sport, or was it detrimental to the sport?
It's a hard one. I'm a firm believer in accountability. And I think because of that, I think it's ridiculous that people that are completely dependent on decision making by a set of individuals, whether it be stewards in Formula One or referees in football, whatever, can't utter their grievances. Mm-hmm. Because the only time that would be an issue is if mistakes were made and they don't want to have to explain it away, or want to uphold their own credibility, even though they might have made a mistake and don't deserve it. What's happened in the football, for example, at the moment is the PGMOL, which is the refereeing sort of body, and they just often come out and say, "Yeah, we admit we made a mistake," mm-hmm. But the actual repercussions of those mistakes are just not felt because you can't go back. You're not docking points. You're not overturning decisions. I think it's ridiculous if it is true that they've had to sign certain waivers of some kind, not to say X, Y, and Z. I think it's ridiculous then that they are put in front of journalists and put in front of the media at every single first opportunity that they can get to promote the sport. Let's not get this wrong. The more media that is there, the more you talk to media, the more at the end of the day, Formula One is being promoted. And if you're being hogtied essentially as to what you can say, those two just don't make any sense. Yeah. And because of that, I'm not remotely surprised that you get to this situation now where Max Verstappen is where he stands and he says, I don't want to say anything. And we've had similar scenarios in the past with your Jose Mourinho's, your Pep Guardiola's of the world, who are generally quite outspoken football managers who have just said, I'm not saying anything.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen it with Rossi Erasmus. I mean, that was maybe going not just a little bit over the line, but maybe going far past the line with his 1 hour rant about the adjudication of a match that South Africa played in. What I struggle with is, obviously you don't want it to become a sort of a bickering fest, right? You don't want to be like, this is unfair and there's conspiracy theories against me.
Exactly.
Like, you don't want that. But also within that lives within the controversy lives a bit of the enjoyment of the sport, especially in something like rugby, in Formula One, where, you got guys in the car with a helmet on. You don't see any expression, you don't see any emotion, you don't really see them. They can't communicate with the opposition. In rugby, you see fisticuffs all the time. In football, you see guys sort of shouting at each other, pushing and shoving. You see that contact with one another. Formula One now has radio, or for the last couple of years, decade, has had radio where you can get an insight into what these guys are thinking. But the only other time you can actually feel their emotions, feel their story, is through these press conferences. And now by hamstringing them, you're removing that element of excitement. Surely that's detrimental to the sport, more so than them criticizing the rules.
Yeah. Look, I think if you look at Rassi, for example, the Rassi example, I think you would argue if someone has the balls to take them on, albeit he was punished for it,
severely,
you could argue that the net result for the sport and officiating was actually positive.
Right.
Because it definitely gave the world rugby refereeing body a big wake-up call.
Absolutely.
And it showed them that there has to be accountability. There have to be self-correcting measures within refereeing. And I think you could argue that, if Max feels so strongly about all of this, that there is a certain degree of it being in his own hand to try and change it.
Mm-hmm.
But that relies way too heavily on the protagonists in sport taking on the man.
Yeah.
And because of that is a clear sign that you can't protect people to the detriment of accountability and decision making. You can't do that. I don't think that leads you anywhere, and for that reason, I agree with you that it is bad for a sport, because only by exposing the mistakes and making officials realize that they will be scrutinized are decisions like the decision that Max seems to completely disagree with in the first corner, being executed and looked at in a better way in the future, and thereby also increasing credibility for officiating, but also the sport as such.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You know what? The funny thing is that a similar situation happened to another driver. I can't remember who it was. They received a 10-second penalty. So there already comes my grievance with, where's the line? What are the rules? When are certain penalties sort of adjudicated and when not? Because at this point, it all feels like a bit of a thumb suck. If you look back 4 years, is the race where Hamilton lost against Max Verstappen. There's a whole bunch of controversy there.
And you would argue the rub of the green was his.
On Max's side, right?
Yeah.
And that cost Lewis Hamilton a world title, and therefore then also taking the record of world titles. So, it goes both ways, and Max isn't always right, but in this case, I think he was wrong.
Yeah,
he was wrong with regards to the way that the decision that was made. I think was correct. I think he should have gotten a 10-second penalty, not a 5-second penalty. So they were quite lenient in that regard. But the fact that these guys aren't allowed to talk about it anymore, I think is terrible. And it just goes to show that there's no responsibility taken by the FIA.
Yeah.
And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
And I would argue it's par for the course for the FIA, since I remember watching and following Formula One. The FIA has always been shrouded in quite a lot of quite a lot of
Controversy.
criticism
Yeah.
and questions as to like who's pulling the strings and what are the powers that be and what real world influence do they possibly have on what happens on the track. And I think Formula One, particularly with all the rules and all the regulations in terms of engines and et cetera, is so molded by what the FIA does and says, that it comes to the fore even more. I think that magnifying glass is way more magnified when it comes to this kind of thing. And then if you, on top of that, hog tie your protagonists, the people that are actually bringing you in the money, the guys that are sitting behind the steering wheels in the car, then a lot of question marks start to emerge. And you really do wonder if it's tenable in that sense. I mean, Formula One's not going anywhere, but I almost feel like Formula One has turned the corner in terms of, whoa, this, it looks like they've created a really interesting dynamic this season with new teams emerging, new young drivers. They're in a good space. They used the 4 very good years of Drive to Survive to get the sport to where it needed to be, because if you read anything, they told you F1 was dead a few years ago. Yeah. So they've done all of that, and then you hear a story like this.
Taints it.
It's you wonder what, you question motivations behind it.
The head of the FIA, or the race director, is a people might lambaste me for getting this wrong. I think he's Saudi Arabian.
Yeah, he is Saudi. Yeah.
Does that play an effect in terms of culture and critiquing authority?
It could be. I mean, I can only speak about I have friends who've spent time working in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and it is one of the most demanding top-down environments you can work in. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that culture bleeds over. I think each person should also be judged individually.
Right.
But I think there is. But it was the same under Bernie Ecclestone. It was a very top-down organization.
It's a fair point out.
So I don't think that changes. Not in an old, like behemoth. Knight's favorite word. Shout out to Knights. I don't think it. Yeah, I think it takes time to change, or it's something that just is prevalent.
It's definitely a pity. It's as you've alluded to, it is currently the most exciting start to a season, at least that we have seen in many, many years, with I think 4 different race winners in 5 races or something like that. Currently, Piastri is leading the driver championship, having won the last race. Lando Norris was chasing down Leclerc for 3rd position, but didn't manage to catch him in the end. So he finished 4th, and Verstappen finished 2nd. So they are both on the same amount of points, and Piastri is about 13 points ahead of them. So the whole discussion that we've had in the past about drivers in one team, who do they back? Is there driver 1, driver 2? That's going to become very interesting. I think McLaren needs to probably just deal with it as whoever's leading the championship is number 1, because that's the best chance of them winning a driver championship, and support the second driver as much as possible.
And I think what will play into their hand is that they'll easily win the Constructors title again. So I think they'll wrap that up probably way before that conversation becomes
absolutely relevant,
and that helps them then as a team to create sober decisions, or say, hey, we're going to try and back both of them as good as we can, because if they do end up taking each other out, it's fine. We've won the Constructors title. So very interesting Formula One season this year for sure. Hopefully it continues as such. The other teams aren't going away. They're all hanging in there. So let's see what happens. Anything else? Any other sports to mention? The leftovers are finished, I think. We finished the leftovers.
Finally. We are satisfied.
Tomorrow, we take you through what a week, some observations and the similar and the likes.
Talk about a bit of nudity.
Yeah, possibly.
And arrests.
Possibly, yeah. So tune in for that. Like, subscribe, share it with your mom. And
then if you missed Maxi, just comment below.
Yeah.
Send him your love. Bye.
Bye.